I call Adrian Rafi.
Tēnā koe e te māngai o te ware o tērā tēnā tātou katoa. It gives me great pleasure, in a way, to have the opportunity to speak to this. I think it's really important that I again acknowledge all of those families that are sitting in their state homes today, wondering about the future of their occupancy of the houses that they live in, their homes. I also want to acknowledge those families that have applied for State House and have been declined. They have been declined because the rules around who qualifies for a State House and who doesn't has changed. And that hasn't lowered the number of people wanting social houses. It means that the government has just written them off. And so I want to acknowledge those families as well, because this bill does nothing for them. Nothing at all. This bill does nothing, has got nothing to do with what the government benches talk about that it has, although we haven't heard a lot from them, especially today. We've heard, as my colleague said, interjections that have lasted longer than their speeches. And in a democratic society, that's actually not good enough. It's not good enough for interjections that we've heard today. Very few of them, but it's not good enough that when given the opportunity to actually speak to those issues, that you get a 1-minute speech in response. And that as my colleague Annette, the Honourable Annette King pointed out, the government benches, they're actually not doing their job properly. And so I go to these bills that have come out of the Social Housing Reform, Flexible Purchasing, Remedial Matters Bill. Let's talk about the flexible purchasing, or as I mentioned during the committee stage, the flexible sales, because that's what it really is. These bills provide the mechanism for the government to sell state assets. That's what it does. No one can deny that. In fact, if that was right, if that wasn't right, why haven't we heard from the government benches about that particular issue? So in the sale of these state assets, they also transfer the responsibility to provide social housing, and that's actually not good enough. It is an obligation on the government to provide those houses, and if it's not, then the government should say so. The government should tell the country that, come clean, tell the community that they don't want to be in that business anymore. That they do not want to provide social housing for New Zealand. That's what this bill is effectively saying. They want to transfer the responsibility to community organisations and others, property developers. We don't know, because under section 137A of this bill, it gives the power to the minister to make those decisions. The minister can make the decisions around transferring those assets to, well, from my reading, anyone the minister chooses to do so. And without any rules around it, we don't know how long those houses have to stay as social houses. Is it 1 year, 2 years, 10 years? Maybe after 2 years, they can be transferred or sold on open market, and no doubt for a large profit, and then no longer will those homes be affordable, no longer will those homes be social houses. So does the big question in debating this particular bill, will there be one single more social house in New Zealand when this bill takes effect? And the answer is no, not one single one. Nothing. How then can the members opposite claim that this bill will provide more social housing. It doesn't. It does not. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I'm bound to say that the public should have had the opportunity to have input into this bill. New Zealanders, Kiwis, ordinary Kiwis out there have been denied the opportunity of that our democratic system offers. And they have not had the opportunity to give evidence. We've heard in the contribution from the Honourable Annette King, one organisation that was able to get out a press release in time to give their thoughts on it. Imagine what other organisations might have been able to contribute. There's nothing in this bill, as I started to allude to in one of my earlier contributions, around the government's treaty obligations. It talks a lot about providing Māori housing, and yet in this bill there's no mention under the enabling clause for the minister to give any recognition whatsoever to its treaty partners, none whatsoever. So that may or may not happen, but there's no obligation on the government to do that. And I call on the members opposite. They have one more call. Maybe they can answer some of those concerns that more than just myself has. I think, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, those families that are sitting at home wondering about the future of the occupancy of their homes will be very concerned that they haven't had the opportunity to make a contribution and give evidence on this bill. Actually, we haven't heard any compelling evidence or any compelling contribution from the members opposite about exactly why this bill is so important that it has to go through under urgency. Because I haven't seen or heard any contribution from them addressing that issue. There is no urgency in this. It is a matter of that the government has decided that it wants to get this legislation through under the urgency of the budget, so that the general public will miss the fact that, or may miss the fact that this is about flexible sales, flexible sale of state assets. It is not flexible about the purchasing, because when you have purchasing, you also have someone who is selling. And that is the government, on behalf of all New Zealanders, selling its stake in social housing in New Zealand and transferring the responsibility that it has to organisations and others to carry out that function, and sir, that's just not good enough. Nō reira, ka tuku atu taku kōrero ki aku iwi katoa. Kia kaha kia āta titiro ki roto ki ēnei piri nei. Kaua pōturi kia tuku atu o koutou kōrero ki a rātou mā. Te kāwanatanga. Nō reira, Mr. Speaker, tēnā koe.
Nā koe.